What's growing on, gardeners? It's Wednesday, March 13th, and spring is right around the corner here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. But even though that spring is just about here, it may feel like an eternity before we're harvesting anything more exciting than cold, hardy, leafy greens from our yard and garden. What about the really exciting fruits that we love? Well, for most of us, they're not available until the middle of summer, which is months away. But wait, I'm here to tell you that's not exactly the case. And on this video, I'm going to share with you 5 different perennials that will give you fruit immediately in the spring. These are insanely early things to get you excited that you can start harvesting right away.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and spread shop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
But before I begin, we are not going to focus on subtropical and tropical fruit trees that can bear fruit during the winter. We're not going to talk about avocados, we're not going to talk about mangoes, we're not going to talk about some varieties of citrus that are able to fruit throughout the winter, because frankly, if you're able to grow things like this throughout the winter, your winters probably aren't that harsh. I'm going to focus specifically on temperate species, things that places with long, hard winters have to wait for. Because if you've ever lived in a location with a long, hard winter where there's 3, 4, or 5 months of everything being cold or dead, you really look forward to summer. So the point of this video will be to focus on temperate species of fruit that fruit early in the spring. That way you can really look forward to spring earlier than ever before, because you'll get some nice fresh fruit on your plate. When we think of summer, we often think of big flashy fruits like peaches, pears, plums, and nectarines. But there's a problem with those fruits. They take forever to bear. You have to wait for your trees to wake up out of dormancy. You have to wait for them to flush green growth, produce flowers. The flowers have to be pollinated. Then they have to set fruit. The fruit have to turn mature and then ripen on the tree. It's just a really long process. And because of that, if you live in places with long, harsh winters, when March and April roll around, you may not be all that excited for spring, because you're not really going to be eating anything until midsummer that's really, truly exciting. That's why I'm really excited to share these perennial fruits with you. They start flowering and bearing fruit when it's still pretty cold out. So these fruits are ready to go even before the consistently warm temperatures of summer are here. So you can get excited for early and mid-spring. You don't have to wait until the heat of summer to have something good to eat. One more final disclaimer. I live just outside of Wilmington, North Carolina, Zone 8B, and our last frost date is on average about March 30th. If you live in a climate that is significantly north of mine and you have a much later last frost date, there's nothing I can do to make it so your harvests come in as early as mine. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to make your harvests as early as feasible in your climate. So if you have a last average frost date of May 15th, you're probably not used to picking very many fruits until sometime in August. So if I can have you harvesting food in late May or in early June, that is a massive win. So keep in mind, all of this is relative to your growing season. This is to make things as early as possible. If you're in a much colder zone, there's really nothing you can do, sans growing indoors or getting a greenhouse to catch up to me. Now, right off the bat, perennial number 1 is technically not a fruit, although it is very sweet, but no list of early perennials would be complete without it, and that is asparagus. Asparagus is the first perennial in my garden to break dormancy and provide me a harvest. It is March 13th, and asparagus spears are coming up from the crowns all over this bed. And if asparagus does not seem very exciting to you, I don't think you've ever had fresh asparagus right out of a garden. You probably have only had the stuff at grocery stores, which is tough and chewy and doesn't taste very good at all. Fresh asparagus is so sweet, it is just delicious. About 3 or 4 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long already, I showed you how to plant asparagus crowns in this very bed, and I will link to that video above and down in the video description. It's very important that if you have a decent sized yard and garden, you grow asparagus, because it is one of the easiest things you will ever plant. It pretty much just sustains itself. All I really do is prune it back in the winter and amend it with a little bit of compost and organic fertilizer in the spring, and that's really all I do. And asparagus will produce for you for at least 20 years. They are a pretty long-living perennial. The roots get very, very large, and they're very, very productive. Now, I'm going to harvest one of these pieces of asparagus for you, but I want you to hear just how crisp this is. Listen to that snap. And now listen to the chew. This is legitimately sweet like sugar. It's like honey. So because of how early asparagus is, the ease of growing it, how productive they are, and how delicious they are, no garden is complete without growing asparagus. And these are one of those things that truly will get you excited for the spring. If you're curious where I purchased my asparagus crowns, I'll put direct links down in the video description as to where I got them. Perennial number 2 to get you the earliest possible harvests is strawberries. The strawberry plant is probably the earliest of the fruiting plants that I'm aware of, at least that I grow in my climate. Now, strawberries are obviously delicious. They are very easy to grow, but to get early harvests, you do need to know a few things. Now, there are 3 types of strawberries: June-bearing strawberries, ever-bearing strawberries, and day-neutral strawberries. The large strawberries that give you big harvests all at once are the June-bearing type. So if you want overwhelming baskets of strawberries, you kind of need to get the June-bearing types because they focus all of their energy for that big single harvest. However, they are not going to be the earliest strawberries for you to grow in your yard and garden because they focus all of that energy into one big harvest. If you want to have very early strawberries, you should get yourself either ever-bearing strawberries or day-neutral strawberries and plant them because they spread out the blooming over the course of an entire season. So instead of focusing all that energy to get one big harvest in summer, they spread out that energy and they give you handfuls of strawberries here and there. Now, if you want to have big bushels of strawberries because you want to process them into jam, like I said, you want to get yourself a big bed full of June-bearing types, but you should also supplement them with another growing area that has day-neutral or ever-bearing varieties. That way you can have nice handfuls of strawberries early in the spring. Now, in my strawberry bed, I have 2 different varieties of strawberries. The strawberries over here that are not blooming yet are Albion strawberries, but if you notice, this entire section of strawberries right here are a totally different variety. They are called Quinault, and they are all flowering at the exact same time. This is a day-neutral strawberry that produces very large, delicious, sweet strawberries. And as you can see, I have flowers all over the place. And if you zoom in even more closely, you will see that a bunch of these have already set fruit. So I have strawberries there on that plant. I have strawberries there on that plant. Ooh, I have some really large strawberries that have formed down here. So these early day-neutral varieties, they have already set strawberries for me, and I will probably be able to start picking them in a matter of only weeks. And hey, now that I looked a little bit closer, I noticed that my Albion strawberries are starting to flower as well. I believe these are a day-neutral variety as well. They're just a little bit later. They are starting to set fruit as well. Ah, there are little baby strawberries there. So this is the nice benefit of growing multiple varieties. That way you have a staggered harvest. Here in my climate, I start picking these day-neutral strawberries as early as April. So I will be out here probably only in about 3 or 4 weeks harvesting my very first strawberries. They are one of the earliest fruits that you can plant. So if you are not growing strawberries, be sure to plant some day-neutral or ever-bearing strawberries in a nice patch to give yourself really early harvests. And if you want to process things into jam, start a June-bearing bed as well. Just understand that they will be a little bit later. Perennial number 3 that you simply must grow for insanely early harvests is the blueberry. Believe it or not, blueberries are second only to strawberries in my yard when it comes to earliness of the fruit. And this should come as no surprise to you because my plants are absolutely loaded right now. Believe it or not, most of the flowering is already complete, and I have tremendous fruit set with hundreds of berries on every single bush. Now, what is really amazing about blueberries is I have no idea what the cold hardiness of the blooms are. These bushes all start flowering for me in January, and it gets pretty cold here in January. We had back-to-back nights of 17 degrees and 19 degrees back in January. It did absolutely nothing to the blooms. And keep in mind, I'm growing rabbit eye and southern high bush varieties of blueberries, so they're not as cold hardy. You can get half high or northern high bush varieties of blueberries that are even more cold hardy. So it is impressive how early these things bloom and start setting fruit and the cold, the freezing temperatures, it does absolutely nothing to them. I start harvesting blueberries in April here in North Carolina. Blueberries require cross-pollination, so you have to grow the same blueberry type with different varieties that are compatible to cross-pollinate. So these are my southern high bush varieties. I grow Star and O'Neill. The short bush right here is an O'Neill. This bush right here that is very tall and loaded with fruit is Star. You can see the blooms and fruits all over the place. And then the other short bush right here is an O'Neill variety as well. So they intermix with their pollen and they cross-pollinate each other. And for me, the southern high bush varieties are very early. I'm picking them by mid-April. Then over here I have rabbit eye varieties of blueberries. These are a little bit later. So when I plant the two different types of blueberries, I kind of get an early harvest from the southern high bush and a later harvest from the rabbit eye. For the rabbit eyes, I grow Cruer, Titan, and something called pink lemonade. This right here is a pink lemonade. It's one of the few self-fertile blueberries, and they are absolutely delicious and pink like the name implies. But these are, like I said, they're later. So you can see they have more blooms on them, but they're still loaded with fruits. So even the later rabbit eye varieties are super productive and super early. If you're north of me, you'll probably want to grow northern high bush varieties instead of southern high bush varieties. They have more chill hours, so they flower a little bit later. That way they avoid the really painfully cold nights of winter. The southern high bush will flower earlier. That's why they flower in January here, but my Januaries just aren't cold enough to kill the blooms. That's responsible for the early harvests. Now, if you need help growing blueberries, I will link to a guide both above and down in the video description that will teach you everything you know about growing blueberries. The hardest part is just picking compatible varieties. Once you get the right varieties in ground, they are a breeze to grow and they will feed you for probably the rest of your life. And perennials 4 and 5 that you should grow for insanely early harvests in spring are primocane fruiting blackberries and raspberries. What does that mean exactly? The vegetative growth that grows up from the roots on blackberries and raspberries, the branches, if you will, they're actually called canes, and there are two different types of canes. Primocanes and floricanes. The big hardy canes that grow right up out of the ground immediately in the warm weather, they're called the primocanes. Then later in the life of the primocane, they will have offshoots that shoot to an angle at the different nodes, and then they will produce flowers. Those little offshoots are called the floricanes. Now, most traditional varieties of blackberries and raspberries produce their fruit on the floricanes, and they often don't develop until the following season unless you're in a really warm climate with a long growing season. So typically the first year you plant your blackberries and raspberries, they will grow primocanes from the roots, and then the primocanes will overwinter. You'll prune them back a little bit, and then they will shoot out side growth come the next spring, and then that will have the flowers on them. They will be the floricanes. If you have a really long growing season, you may be able to get floricane production that first year in the fall, if you're lucky enough. Breeders are developing new varieties of blackberries and raspberries all the time, and some of the new characteristics that they're breeding into these varieties are the ability to fruit on the primocanes, that first year's growth, that initial growth. And this is a huge game changer. No, this is not GMO or anything funny like that. This is just natural breeding processes, sort of like seed saving when it comes to growing vegetables. They're just inbreeding certain traits that they want to express. And these varieties are just amazing. This is the very first blackberry that I ever planted, and this is a variety called Prime Arc Freedom. That stands for Prime Arkansas Freedom. It was developed in Arkansas. It's a very humidity and heat tolerant variety. And this is a primocane fruiter right here. It is very vigorous. It makes absolutely enormous fruit. Next to it, I planted a traditional blackberry called Navajo Thornless. Much smaller fruit, takes a lot longer to wake up and a lot longer to grow. Really kind of not all that happy with that variety. So much did I like the Primark Freedom that I saw one at Lowe's the following year, and I planted another one in ground here. Just look at the difference in vigor between that plant and that plant. You can see the Primark Freedom really is a winner in terms of growth. So because the primocanes develop flowers on them, and you don't have to wait for the primocanes to be mature and produce floricanes to flower, they flower and fruit absurdly early. Just look at this blackberry right here. It is covered in flowers as far as the eye can see, and some of them are already starting to bloom. In fact, it looks like a few of them already pollinated, and right there I think you can see I actually have my first blackberry forming already for the season. Now that berry plant was 3 or 4 years old. This one is only a year or two old, and it doesn't matter. It is flowering just like the other one. You can see the power of these primocane fruiting varieties. They develop fruit so early, and again, it's only March 13th and my berries are flowering. Now, just like with my blueberries, I have no idea what the cold hardiness of my blackberries are. That's because despite the fact that we get down into the teens every single winter here, I've never seen a temperature where the blackberries die back. They keep their leaves for most of the winter. They only lose about half of them. The other ones stay kind of like a greenish purple. They turn colors. They turn some type of protectant purple color, and then as soon as it warms up after Valentine's Day, they all turn green again. And these start flowering for me often in the middle of February once we get a warm spell. And then it gets freezing again. We get nights in the 20s, maybe even the upper teens, and it does nothing to the blooms at all. So because of this, I get absurdly early production on my fruit. I start harvesting blackberries here on these primocane fruiting varieties in May, early May, and they are huge, enormous, big blackberries. Absolutely delicious. One berry is a whole mouthful. It's utterly astounding. So if you want something that is really cold hardy, really vigorous, and fruits for you immediately, both the first year and right away as the plants wake up from dormancy, get these primocane fruiting varieties. It's absolutely incredible. Now, I have to be a little bit honest about something. When it comes to raspberry varieties, I'm far from an expert, and that's because I'm not the biggest fan of raspberries. I love raspberry jam. I love things with raspberry put into it, whether it's raspberry barbecue sauce, raspberry cookies, whatever. Love that. But when it comes to actually eating the fruits themselves, they're not my favorite. I tend to like blackberries a whole lot more. So because of that, I've been kind of late getting into the raspberry game. I picked a plant about 3 years ago, hated it, dug it up, threw it out, and I replaced it this last fall with a new variety. And this is a variety called Double Gold Yellow, and as the name implies, this is actually a golden raspberry, not a red raspberry. And believe it or not, I planted this last year, but it did fruit for me the very first year, probably because our growing season here is long enough. Now, the reason why it's double gold yellow is because it has 2 harvests. It doesn't just fruit on the floricanes, it fruits on the primocanes. So what you do with this variety is as follows. You allow the primocanes to grow as you typically would, and they take the season to grow, and then they should fruit for you in the fall. But then you overwinter all of that growth, and then they will produce floricanes in the late winter, early spring the following year, and you should have an early harvest of spring berries basically on the old growth. So because of that, you would not prune these flush to the ground at the end of the season. You would allow these plants to grow throughout the fall, and then you would evaluate them come the end of winter and only remove any kind of dead growth. You'd want to save whatever you possibly can, because that previous year's wood is going to fruit for you again the following season. Then when the old wood fruits from you, that is when it will die back and you remove it. It wouldn't be an easy pruning job like the primocane fruiting blackberries that you can just cut down every single year. But that being said, if you do the pruning correct with these raspberries and you preserve the previous year's wood, they will fruit for you come the middle of spring. So because I just planted this over 1 year and it didn't get a chance to really harden off, it looks like it did take a little bit of winter damage as to be expected. In fact, right here you can still see some of the old raspberries from last year. This was the old growth, so I failed to remove that. But the point being, look for some of these varieties of raspberries that give you 2 harvests. The first year you'll only get a late harvest in the fall, but then if you preserve that old year's wood, you'll get something really nice and early in the spring the following year. And that right there are 5 different perennials that you can grow to have the earliest harvest as possible in spring. Well, relative to your spring anyway. I know for me, these are all the earliest things in my yard and garden. Now that being said, I'm not saying that these are the only temperate fruits that are really early. These are just the earliest things that I can vouch for that I grow personally. I know that things like mulberries are supposed to be very early, but I have no experience with them. I haven't grown them before. And there are probably a bunch of other smaller fruited berries that will fruit for you very early as well. Maybe I'm just not familiar with them. And of course, there's a ton of subtropicals and tropicals that if you have the climate that can grow them throughout the winter, they can flower and fruit for you in the winter as well. So if you're in a warm enough climate, the world is your oyster. But I wanted to make this video specifically for the people in temperate climates with very long winters. We kind of have medium winters here in North Carolina, but I used to live in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and when I dealt with those winters that went on for about 5 months, I know how desperate we are come the spring that we bite into something delicious in our garden. So hopefully these will give you some ideas to extend your harvest and get fresh fruits as early as possible. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life in my garden and to grow these various fruit trees and perennials that I showed you in this video, I'll link to everything down in the video description below in my Amazon storefront. So click on the Amazon link, you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Dale, something terrible happened. I went outside and I filmed a video, and then I realized I am all out of adventures with Dale. I need another one, Dale. Can you do something cool? Is that all you're gonna do? You're just gonna chew on your stuffed animal? Oh, you have a cow hoof. The stinkiest of all the Dale chews. Oh, they're stinky, but he loves them. Probably why he likes them so much with that big old nose. You are such a good boy.